And now, El Dorado County's most noted historian, George W. Peabody.
George. Somebody wanted to hear me speak? Woof, woof. Okay, well, some of the announcements have already been made that I'd planned on making, but I will continue on.
George,
Since I was asked to make,
they can't hear in the back.
Can you use the mic, George?
oh, can you hear me back there? No. Okay.
Just hold it to your mouth, it's on.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Chris Payne has been introduced and Mary Corey has been introduced. And I don't know if Joyce Thompson is here or not, but she is the vice president of El Dorado County Historical Society, who knows where everything is, what needs to be done. She's a leader, always helpful and productive. And Marilyn Ferguson, I know she's not here, but you can see her at the Main Street Museum, where she is the director. And she also supplied a lot of pictures. Can you hear me back there now? I gotta have this right up to my mouth. I might eat it for lunch. And here's more people coming in anyway. Marilyn Ferguson, director of the Main Street Museum, collector of Historiana, always available with resource material. It is Marilyn who, in 1994, registered Spanish Hill, where you're sitting here right now, as the Spanish Hill Historical Mining Complex with the California State Historical Resources Inventory. And I thank Marilyn for that, even though I know she's not here, for the photographic copy of pre-development Spanish Hill. And we have that album of photographs here on the table if you want to see it later. Also, I want to thank Marilyn's daughter for unlocking the Main Street Museum to let me out the evening of Founders Day 2007, when I was wondering if I had become a museum artifact. And getting acquainted with Molly. You didn't know about the ghost? Yeah, with Molly. Okay. Then we have Carol Sexton, treasurer, El Dorado County Historical Society, illustrator and good all-around helper. We have Don Uhlman, board member. He's here. There you are. And his wife, Carolyn, who is a great editor and illustrator of tailings of the museum's monthly publication. And Phyllis Snyder, who is right here. Come on, Phyllis. That's my girl. She's 97 and I'm 93, so I'm not kids. And let's see here. Oh yeah, she's my remaining peer, my friend. She lives right here in Escalon. And then is Stacy Vrieken here? Stacy Vrieken, are you here? Okay, she's not here. She's a lady who is looking for people to interview. We old timers. And we're also looking for old timers for her to interview. But if she's not here, that's tough. Okay, and finally, let's hear it not only for our guests, but let's hear it for Samuel Clemens. What am I saying? Mark? Twain. Okay. Now, let's talk about recent Spanish Hill. And to me, recent, at 93 years of age, recent is 1992 to 1995. There was a sentiment at that time to develop the mined out Spanish Hill as a natural, beautiful city park for an historical dry mining, hydraulic mining, canal and forestry educational center for musical and theatrical presentations, including a convention center. It would preserve the general topography, mark the Studebaker Wheelbarrow Trail for hiking, manage the existing forested and chaparral areas, and preserve access to wildlife. It was to be the perfect complement to Placerville's existing gold bug hard rock mine Placerville's existing gold bug hard rock seam mining tunnel and ore crushing mill park to educate children and attract visitors and their money. It didn't happen, did it?
No.
But that's okay. We've got you here anyway. Now, we're going to go to school.
Can't hear you.
We're going to go to school. Can you hear me now? Okay. We're going, and I want your attention, class. Now let's learn about Spanish dry diggings and the gold of Placerville's Spanish Hill, also known as Dutch Town. I don't know why, but that's what the book said. During the Jurassic period, which is before my time, that is of the dinosaurs anyway, some 120 million years ago, the region around the site of today's Placerville was a shallow sea without hills, rivers, or gold. But deep down in the earth below that shallow sea, where the Sierra Nevada and its foothills would rise. Did I say rise? Yes, because the Pacific Ocean floor, called the Pacific Plate, constantly presses eastward and under our continent, lifting the continental plate higher and making mountains and volcanoes. It was there, 2 miles below the ocean floor, that brewed a great soup of gold, iron, sulfur, quartz, and many other minerals and gases in solution. Now, I want to talk about the word solution. When you ladies sprinkle salt into some water, what happens to the salt? Does it melt? No. It goes into solution with the water. The salt, in order to be melted, requires 1,112 degrees to melt it, but it will dissolve into cold water. So that's the difference between solution and melting. Now, I'm going to tell you some things that you may not want to believe now. You may not want to believe that one either. Okay. Now, these minerals, like iron and gold, will go into solution with water if the water is 600 degrees Fahrenheit and under high pressure. Well, you ladies know what pressure cookers are, but where can you get a pressure cooker that can push enough pressure so that the water can go up to 600 degrees and not boil? And that is 2 miles down under the ocean floor. Now, this this solution is going to find its way upward into the cracks and fissures forming during the first stirrings of the unborn mountains. And remember, I said that salt will dissolve in cold water, but it melts at 1,112 degrees. Gold also will dissolve in water, but again, at 600 degrees under high pressure. Now, as the solution cools against the cracks and fissure walls, its quartz, gold, and other metal and mineral components were deposited, sometimes filling the cavities as the water evaporated, as cold or hot water springs and whatever, steam vents and all that. With the Cretaceous period of flowering plants, the young Sierra Nevada and its hoards of gold rose significantly some 70 million years ago, starting its erosion by wind, rain, frost, snow, and earthquake. Now, I want you to notice that we have very little rain compared to these antique dates. When the Sierra Nevada was at its maximum height, the storms were unbelievable. They would wash the whole mountainside down the hill.
The mic, George. A little bit closer with the mic.
The Sierra Nevada rose to considerably monstrous proportions as compared with what it is today. But with the terrible, terrible weather that it produced by accepting the Pacific Ocean storms, just washed this area completely down. Hard to believe the amount of washing done. Unless you drive around, you see all these ravines and gorges and things. Anyway, the Tertiary period, which saw the spread of mammals, witnessed the Sierra Nevada, which at its full stature, some 15 million years ago, its deposits of gold raised well above the sea level. Big motion so that the old ocean bottom is now exposed. Is this still going? Yeah. Anyway.
You gotta keep it really close to your mouth because they can't hear that.
Okay. So, accompanied by great volcanic action, featured by earthquakes and freezing, abraded by the wrath of storms and grinding of glaciers, the high Sierra Nevada was sculptured, exposing its hidden veins of gold ore to erosion. It was then that the Tertiary period South Fork of the American River ran, carrying particles of gold, sand, and gravel through the area of today's Pacific House and westward. The gold-rich gravels of the river's 3-mile wide course. You know, the Mississippi is 1 mile across. We're talking about a South Fork of the American River that's 3 miles across. Somewhat parallel and divided by today's Weber Creek area. It is stratified well above the hills of Newtown, Fort Jim, Coon Hollow, Placerville, Diamond Springs, and on westward. The last traces are found near Gold Hill on the ridge between today's Weber Creek and the South Fork of the American River, and on to Pilot Hill. No. The Tertiary period South Fork of the American River is not to be confused with the Motherlode Fault. The Maloney's Fault is the name of the Motherlode Fault, and it's called Maloney's because all of the gold looked like little golden melons, shiny pebbles. The Maloney's Fault skirts the west side of Placerville as it runs northward from beyond the Union Mine dump to Kelsey and on north beyond that. And it is the deep blue lead, and I happen to have that deep blue lead card here for some reason. Number 37 I am. And the deep blue lead, which you can see if you go to the smooth flat house and look down the hole in the bar at the basement, and then you can see the deep blue lead there. Now that deep blue lead arrives from the White Rock area from the north and then turns southwest and under Spanish Hills Tertiary gravel basin. So we have tertiary gravel basins from the river, and we have a deep blue lead underneath it, which is a very rich source of hard rock gold. In time, heavy layers of ash and flow from volcanoes covered the ancient river and its banks of sand, gravel, and gold. Weather changes because the High Sierra has reduced in height. Weather changes resulting from the effects of vigorous erosion upon the Sierra Nevada height provided less and less water for young rivers to cut through the volcanic layers, and so gold-bearing gravel beds were exposed only in a scattering of places where gold was found. Gold was discovered by James Wilson Marshall in January of 24th, 1848 in the tail race of Sutter's sawmill. Now that discovery was made by Americans in a foreign land known as Mexico. Then it was discovered 6 days before we had signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and therefore it had to be kept secret. Members of the United States Army's Honorable Discharge Mormon Battalion found gold during June of 1848 along the South Fork of Weber Creek, just downstream from today's Snows Road. And then Charles M. Weber, during the summer of 1848, stumbled across the cut which Weber Creek had carved through the Motherlode Fault. That's the Maloney's Fault, where the rich placers of the ancient American river mingled with the seam gold of the fault's deep fissures, where Weberville and Coon Hollow were established across the creek from one another between today's Weber Creek bridges of Highway 49 and Big Cut Road. With his wealth, Weber built the city of Stockton and named it after Commodore Stockton of the United States Navy. Now, we're going to have an intermission so I can sit down and rest, and you can talk about yourself, and you can ask me questions if you want. So raise a hand if you have a question, and we have another half an hour of talk. The William Daler Company. Can you hear me back there? The William Daler Company, working Weber Creek downstream from Weberville, where of course Mr. Weber had made his fortune, and Coon Hollow, reported that gold had been found in Placerville, a name which translates to Sandbankville. Sandbankville, that's what Placerville means. Placer means sandbank in Spanish. And so today, the name translates then to Sandbankville, and he directed newcomers to go to what we now call Placerville and explore that area. It was the seemingly endless supply of these flakes and nuggets, placer gold. Where did they get the gold from? Sandbanks, not from hard rock. Okay. Opposed to seam hard rock gold that called men here from the world over. Miners, taking Daler's advice, found gold-bearing sand and gravel in immense quantities. Placer gold, which had been rain-washed into the ravines for millions of years from the ancient 3-mile-wide American River, just under the volcanic capping of the hills. Now I'm going to give you some examples. Big Spanish Hill. That's where you're sitting right now. Sack and pack. That's the way the miners worked. There was no water here. So they would put their shovels into the ground, dig out the sand and put it in a sack and take it down to Hangtown Creek, a place called Shirt Tail Bend. And it was on the Studebaker wheelbarrow trail that most of the heavy material was moved from here down to there until later. Miners taking daily, I beg your pardon. Oregon Ravine is another example. Oregon Ravine is between the city parks, swimming pool, and the Catholic Church. 1848 to 1851, sack and pack again to the creek. $1 million in gold at $16 an ounce. Not $1,600 an ounce, but $16 an ounce. $1 million in gold. At dry diggings, cradles were used, first in October the 13th, 1849, during the season's first rainstorm. I don't know if you know what a cradle is, but it is a rocking device which allows the sand and gravel to be dashed back and forth with water. And then the gold, which is heaviest, settles in riffles in the cradle. Cedar Ravine, today's Cedar Ravine Road, another $1 million. That's 250 troy pounds of gold at $16 an ounce. Spanish Ravine, today's Spanish Ravine Road, another $1 million. Two sailors washed $3,500 worth of gold. That's 200 ounces at $16 an ounce. Imagine what that would be today. Log Cabin Ravine, the road to Goldbug City Park. $250,000. That's 1,600 ounces. That's $16 per ounce. Immigrant Ravine. That's today's Mosquito Road. The Shirt Tail Bend, where everybody was doing their panning. Shirt Tail Bend. Today's intersection of Mosquito Road, Broadway, and Main Street at Hangtown Creek. Now this is the first time that immigrants had seen panning being done to get the gold. Well, what they saw were shirt tails flying because the panners took off their boots and took off their trousers, and the shirt tails flew in the wind. To demonstrate the flow of immigrants, only 22 months after gold was discovered, with no roads, no maps, no automobiles, no government, nothing. By December of 1849, the Sierra Nevada foothills had been prospected from Yuba River all the way south to Stanislaus River, with valuable mines found 100 miles in both directions. The diggings from Shirt Tail Bend downstream to today's town of Cold Springs was nearly deserted for lack of water by April of 1850. Water was being diverted. Talk about dry diggings. The first local hydraulic mining. Now, hydraulic mining is where you have the high pressure water coming out of a nozzle. Oh, I can hear this now. Coming out of a nozzle and washing the embankment off. Now, if you look behind you, you'll see where the hills have been washed away by the high pressure hydraulic waters. So By December of 1855, Spanish Hill, lying between today's Spanish Ravine Road and Wilsey Road, and other sand hills surrounding Placerville, were being hydraulic mined with water. Delivered by the South Fork Company's main trunk known as the Iowa Canal. And that water was brought down from about Khyber's area. Well, when the miner doesn't have any water to mine with, he is busy digging water ditches. And so we have probably the largest number of miles of water flow on ditches in California, because the miners were out of water and had to dig the water ditches from all the way up by Khyber's to bring the water in. And then when they got the water, they could mine again. Quickly, the top of Big Spanish Hill, the entire width of the claim had been washed off to the deep depth of 60 feet, all of which from the surface down had paid well. At the bottom of the claim in 1989, now I've changed 100 years here, now we're talking about 1989, I personally saw rails and a car for carrying off huge boulders exposed in washing. These are called erratics from glacier times, and there's one right out here next to the cliffs, still preserved. Restrictions against hydraulicking and the adoption of the 1890 state law, which required adequate hydraulic debris basins, prevented further serious silting of creeks and rivers downstream. Sand and gravel beds of Spanish Hill had been noted for their rich diggings from the first sack and pack days and the days of the Studebaker wheelbarrow. Now, Marilyn Ferguson, who isn't here today, hiked the Studebaker wheelbarrow trail during 1989, and I know that because she and I hiked it together, and we admired the construction of the wheelbarrow trail. Now, how many know who Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is? What did he write? Okay, so Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were sent by Sir Conan Doyle to Hangtown to observe human nature in the raw. They bought a pup tent, blankets at Placerville Hardware, and some food, and then hiked up the Studebaker Trail to the big basin. Now it seems that when they got up here, right out here somewhere, they put up their tent, put the blankets in the tent, prepared their supper, had their meal, prepared their supper and had their meal, and it was getting dark, so they got into their pup tent and under their blankets and went to sleep. During the night, Sherlock Holmes rolled over and said, "Watson, Watson." And Watson said, "What do you want, Holmes? It's 2 o'clock in the morning." "Watson, I want you to turn over and look straight up and tell me what you deduced from what you see." So Watson turned over and he looked straight up and he said, "Oh my goodness, look at all the stars out there. I bet you there are a bunch of planets like the Earth going around those stars out there." And Holmes says, "No, no, you idiot, somebody stole our tent." Raw, living in the raw. As early as 1856, Spanish Hill averaged $3,000 a week. Now remember, that's at $16 an ounce. That is to say, 16 troy pounds of gold at $16 an ounce, better than an eighth of an ounce of gold from each wheelbarrow load of dirt. One notable day's washing produced nearly 7 troy pounds of gold. Between 1856 and 1858, 2 nuggets were found exceeding 5 ounces, one in Spanish Ravine, that's where we have the road, Spanish Ravine Road, and the other on Spanish Hill, right here. Fairly yellow with gold, the gravel of Spanish Hill helped strengthen the Union Army's effort to win the Civil War between the states. Before 1911, the Spanish Hill mine had produced $6 million at $16 an ounce. That's 31,250 troy pounds of gold. 1994's value, that would be not 6 million, that would be 146,250,000. And in today's value, that's $500 million came out of this gold. The Spanish Hill mining complex, nearly untouched for 80 years, when I wrote this in 1989, retained a high degree of integrity, evoking a strong feeling of association with the motherlode gold rush miners who dug, sacked, packed, wheelbarrowed, sluiced, drifted, panned, and hydraulic the Spanish Hill gravel basin until 1851. It is a site of historical interest and ugly gash, testifying to the destructive greed accompanying the gold rush. Yet, the Big Spanish Bowl was beautiful in 1989 with trees in the embrace of colorful cliffs, which are scenic from several locations within the city boundaries. And Little Spanish Bowl. Have any of you ever heard of Little Spanish Bowl? Well, it's covered up now. And that's why you don't hear about it, but I'm going to tell you about it. It was a natural amphitheater with good acoustics, which seemed deaf to the highway traffic noise. You could step one step into the lip of the opening, and there would be no traffic noise. One step back out, the traffic noise. Back in a few steps, the sound of a flute played by a teacher to children. This is my own experience. I took several steps into the little Spanish basin, and I heard a flute playing. And it was a teacher with a group of children. No sound of the highway noise. And the teacher was talking to the children. I came in and introduced myself, and that was on the November the 8th of 1985. And I spoke of Halley's Comet, which was overhead. And so I suggested that that night, the children should go out and see Halley's Comet themselves. And one child said, "What would happen if Halley's Comet hit the Earth tonight?" And I assured the child that was not going to happen because the comet was in a different orbit than was common to the Earth. But the child insisted, what would happen if Halley's Comet hit the Earth tonight? And the teacher said, there'd be no school tomorrow. Believe it or not, this is an actual experience that I had with that group of people. Okay. The 59-acre Spanish Hill site is a place where California school children could skip, trot out of doors along extensive trails to climb Little Spanish Hill with their teachers, learning about the earth, about the gold rush, and getting acquainted with the California history through their eyes, ears, fingers, and the soles of their feet. The closest similar cliffs of consequence are of the remote Malakoff Digging State Historical Park, which draws tourists and their money to Nevada County, 75 miles to the north. Spanish Hill Historic Mining Complex was our city's most obvious historic, geologic, aesthetic, artistic, photogenic, cultural resource gem, the perfect complement for the city's gold bug mine and tunnel and their crushing mill to attract visitors and their money. The application nominating the Spanish Hill Historic Mining Complex for registration as a California State Point of Interest was prepared by the Heritage Association of El Dorado County for the State Historical Resources Commission. The nomination was granted by the commission. Spanish Hill was added to the California State Historic Resources Inventory, and all archival material pertinent to the mining complex will be preserved for study by posterity. But the Spanish Hill Historic Mining Complex, its Studebaker Wheelbarrow Trail, and its Little Spanish Bowl that Marilyn Ferguson teaches the kids, and I knew, and Carl Borelli knew, we can never, ever have it back again.